What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp quick tutorial for you. So in the last video we started modeling a laundry room based on an image, and now we're going to go through and we're going to keep working on that, kind of work on finishing our room out and also starting to add appliances and that sort of thing. So before I start, I do want to say a big thank you to Dave Garcia. He's the newest pledge on Patreon. So Patreon, as you know, is a site where you guys can support the show, and all of that money is going to go towards expanding the show and just making everything better, getting into some new extensions and some new different kinds of things. So Dave, thank you very much. If you're interested in supporting the show, make sure you check out that link in the notes below. Now let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so yesterday we had focused on coming in here and working on our cabinets and our shelving and that kind of thing. Now we're going to come in and we're just going to kind of continue that. We're going to add counters, and we're going to work on this crown molding up above, and probably work on the window and some other things as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add my counters. And so to add my counters, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a rectangle across the top of these objects. And you can see when I click on these objects right here, they're in groups, and so that geometry is not going to merge. And then I can just come in here and I can kind of pull this up, and in this case we'll give it a thickness of 1 inch. It may not quite be 1 inch, or it may be a little bit more. But the other thing we're going to do is we're going to pull this just a little bit so that we've got a little bit of an overhang. So I may give it, we'll give it 3/4 of an inch. So we'll give it 3/4 of an inch here, and we'll just double click on this front face, and that'll pull that out 3/4 of an inch as well. And then we'll do the same thing we've done before, where we're just going to select this object and we're going to put it in a group. And I'm going to go ahead and name that large counter in the outliner. And then we're going to do the same thing over here, where we're going to start off and we're going to model, we're going to do the same thing here, and we're gonna have to adjust this one because that's where our sink's gonna go, but for right now we're just gonna go ahead and model it in here and get it in a group, and then we'll mess with it more a little bit later. We'll go ahead and call this small counter. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a sink model, probably from the 3D warehouse. We may end up modeling it ourselves. We'll see. We'll do that in a little bit. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to model out the wall over here on this side, because our image has a wall over here with a window in it, and I want to make sure we kind of capture that window and that sort of thing. So I'm going to start off and I'm just going to draw a rectangle here. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle to kind of get this back wall figured out a little bit. And then we're just going to use dimensions, or we're going to use the tape measure tool to kind of figure out where we want this to be. So I'm probably figuring there's going to be about 3 feet from this corner to the window over here. So I'm going to start off, and we'll probably go ahead and just create a guide using the tape measure tool to this point. So now I have a point where I know that I want my window to start. And so from there, what we can do is we can start using guides to rough out our window shape, and then we can draw in the rest of our wall. So like for example, I'm going to figure it's probably about 1 foot 6 inches off the ground, and I'm going to figure it's probably a 6 foot high window, probably a nice big open window. So, and then from there I'm just going to draw another dimension, or another guide using the tape measure tool, and I'm going to figure this is probably a 4 foot wide window. So based on that, I can come in here and I can kind of extend this wall out a little bit. So I can draw this wall in, and then I can erase this out, and this gives me roughly what my window size is going to be. And I'm actually assuming that the window is going to be a little bit smaller because it's got some trim around it, but this is basically the dimensions that I was seeing here. So we're just going to take this piece right here, and we're going to pull it in so that we have kind of our wood trim around the window. So in our image, the wood trim is pretty deep. So, and then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this bottom piece down, because I'm going to assume my sill height is probably at about 1 foot 6 inches high, and then we're going to extend our trim down a little bit more. So I'm just going to kind of extend this down by just manually drawing it in, at least for the moment. So I've got generally my window kind of roughed out, and so now I'm just going to kind of give it a little bit of depth. So I'm going to push pull it out probably, in this case we'll just call it an inch for right now. I'm going to go ahead and select this whole thing. And I'm going to reverse the faces so the proper side is facing out, and then we can come in here and start detailing out our window itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of this in a group, and then I'm going to unselect the middle piece. So I'm going to select basically the trim, and I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to put that in a group, and I'm going to go ahead and name that window trim. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can get in here and I can work on this face without that kind of getting in the way. And so all we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to find the midpoint along this line. So we're just kind of finding that inference point, and then we're just going to model our glass in and that sort of thing. So it's looking like there's probably going to be about a 1 inch. So we're going to offset this by about an inch, and then we're going to push pull this back just a little bit, probably about an inch back, so that it looks like an actual pane of glass. And we'll go ahead and select that, and we'll make that our bottom pane. Then we'll come up here and we'll do something similar on the top, only on the top, before we do that, we're going to detail out, there's some smaller panes in here. So we're just going to figure, I'm going to figure a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch here. And then we'll draw a line across. We can erase out this middle piece. And then this looks like it's divided into 3 panes, so we're just going to right click on this line and we're going to click divide, and we're going to divide that into 3 segments. And so once we divide that into 3 segments, we can just do the same kind of thing. And actually, I'm just going to use the move tool in copy mode to move these over really quickly and easily. And then what you can do is you can double click on this to select it and use the move tool in copy mode again. And then you can double click on both of these and do a shift click, and you can just move them across to wherever that point was where we divided this into 3 pieces. And then you can come in here and you can erase out this extra stuff. And then we'll just push pull our glass back. And remember, we're going to use the memory function of the push pull tool. So I push pulled this back, and then now, whoops, I can activate the push pull tool and just double click on each one of these, and you can see how it's going to push pull them back all to the same depth, so all to that 1 inch. So, and then we can just select this, we can right click on it, we can make that a group, and we'll call this top pane. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a control click over here in my outline. I'm going to select my bottom pane, my top pane, and my window trim, and I'm going to put those in a group, and we'll just call this window. So now we can get in here, we can find that really easily. And probably depending on the way that we decide to render this space, or the way that we kind of decide to show this space, we may need to detail out more of this wall or make this floor a little bit longer. We can mess with that in a bit. So now we've got our window kind of detailed out, and we'll come back and add materials in a little bit. What I want to do now is I want to model out the crown molding along this face. And so in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the profile of the crown molding somewhere along this edge. It doesn't really matter where. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a little box that's just kind of a face in here, and then I can come in here and I can model out kind of the profile of what I want that crown molding to look like. So in this case, I'm just going to make it very simple, and we'll see how this comes out. We may have to adjust this, but I'm just going to draw a profile along here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to extrude it along this face. So I'm doing an initial push-pull on this to see how it looks. So for now, I'm okay with the way that this looks. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw a path. So I'm going to draw a line all the way along the faces that I want to extrude this crown molding along. So I'm going to draw a line all the way across here. And then I may have to do this twice. So for now what we'll do is we'll select this path by doing a shift click, and we're going to activate the follow me tool. Then we're going to click on this face. And you can see how when I click on this face, what it does is it extrudes that profile along this path. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to reverse these faces. But I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to do a shift click, and I'm going to select these two lines to create my path. And then I'm just going to activate the follow me tool and click on this face. And you can see how it extruded that all the way along this path. So now I've got this big old piece of crown molding in here. So I've got my crown molding in here, and you can erase out the extra lines along here. Before I do that, I'm going to put all my crown molding in a group. So I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to click make group. And actually what I'm going to do real quick, because I think I picked up a little extra geometry in here, is I'm going to move this up, double click inside the group, and erase out whatever extra stuff I had in here, because I don't really want this extra geometry. And I'm also going to kind of fill this back piece in, because it looks like for some reason that didn't get filled in when I extruded this. And I'm going to erase out this extra geometry over here. So I'm just kind of doing a cleanup is basically what I'm doing. So this looks like a big uninterrupted piece. And you can see how some of this got left over in here. You can kind of erase all that out as well. I like to keep my models kind of cleaned up when I'm doing stuff like this. But again, that's kind of a personal preference thing, because it's going to be behind this crown molding piece anyway. So now I've got my crown molding modeled in here. So I think we may be good to come in here and start adding materials and accessories. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my 3D warehouse and see what I can find for cabinet hardware. So I'm just going to search for cabinet pull. And you can see how there's a whole bunch of different stuff in here that gets added by a whole bunch of different people. So some people just come in and add these because they like modeling them out, and then also sometimes you get these in here from like manufacturers. They'll actually model out their own stuff so that you can find it and use it in your models. So in this case, I'm just going to find this cabinet bar pull, and I'm going to click download, and I'm going to drop that right in my model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding that into these cabinet components. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this piece as kind of a base, and then I'm going to make copies of it. So I'm just going to use the move tool in copy mode to create a copy of this. And right now that's not in this cabinet group, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place it. So I'm just going to use the move tool, and I'm going to use these little red crosses to kind of rotate this. And then I'm just going to move this into place on my cabinet. So I'm using a little bit of inferencing in order to do that. And that looks pretty centered for right now. If I was really, really worried about it, I'd probably draw a line across and find the exact midpoint. But for what I'm doing right now, I think this is going to be close enough. So you can see how as I brought those in, you can see how these are getting brought in as group 14. So the reason they're getting brought in as group 14 is because they're all copies of this group 14 component. And what that means is you could come in here, and if I was to adjust one of these, you can see how the other one would adjust as well. And I think I'm okay with that for right now. We may have to come back and make them unique later. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take those two objects and I'm going to select them. And then I'm going to find this group for this upper cabinet on the left, and I'm just going to drag them into that group. So now you can see how when I click on this, these are actually inside that group in that cabinet. So I just use the outliner to kind of group things appropriately. And if you wanted to, you could come in and you can rename these cabinet pulls or something like that, if you wanted to keep this organized even more. So it's probably not that big of a deal for right now. So I'm just going to do the same thing for the rest of these cabinets, and then I'll get back to you. Alright, so now all that hardware is in a group, so I can come in here and I can delete out this extra piece. So now I've got hardware in all my cabinets, and they're inside the groups and everything else. Now we can start looking for like washers and dryers and hardware and that sort of thing. So, and depending on the way that you want this to look, when you're picking out a washer-dryer model, you can see how this washer-dryer is actually just an image placed on a flat face. So you can bring that in if you want to, or you can go find a washer-dryer, combination that has more of a where the geometry is actually modeled. And you can also look for something that's the color you want, or you can come back in and you can adjust the color later. So I'm going to bring this in, and as you can see, that comes in backwards. And so all you have to do is you can kind of flip that using the scale tool. And so one of the things that can be useful to you if you want to use it is this is probably in here at scale. And so probably this means that my counter is a little bit too short for this particular model. So in this case, I'm going to scale it down a little bit and move it back into place. But you could also use these models, especially if they come from the manufacturer, to figure out if things are actually going to fit or not. And then I'm just going to make a copy of this one for right now. These are pretty similar looking, so I'm just going to make a copy of that one for right now. And we're going to come back in probably in the next video and color these up so that they look a little bit more realistic. So usually you can come in here and just do a search for a sink and kind of find the sink that you want. So you could look for single sink. You could probably look for like single kitchen sink as well. So, and again, you can see how there's a lot of these basin sinks modeled by Kohler, so the actual manufacturer. So, and you can bring these in, you can see how these are actually sized. The only thing I don't like about these is they're very rounded and they have a lot of polygons. So we're going to go ahead and bring this one in and kind of see how it looks. But you do have to be careful the size of the models that you bring in from the 3D warehouse, because it can really slow your model down. So, and in this case, all I'm going to do is I'm going to set this sink on this counter, and a lot of the time you can find kind of an inference point on here to use. And then I'm just going to move this back in here, and we'll come back in and we'll add kind of a stainless color to this later. The other thing you can do is you can double click inside this counter piece, and you can right click and click intersect faces with model, and you can see how what that should do, and it didn't do it exactly right, but what that should do is that should come in here and intersect this face so that you can delete it out. So that you can actually see the bottom of your sink. So you can see how when I do an intersect faces with model, basically it takes the faces of that, it takes the faces of where those intersect, and it actually makes this its own face. So you can see I was able to delete those out so that I actually have my sink in here. So, and then finally I'm just going to bring a kitchen faucet in. And you can see how there's a lot of these modeled out, again, by the manufacturers. So, and this one's actually modeled with pretty good modeling practices. It's kind of small with all the curves that are in here. So I'm just going to bring this one in for right now. You can definitely pick one that you like. So, and you can see how that comes in here kind of sideways. So I'm just going to use the rotate tool. And actually, you don't even need to use the rotate tool. You can just use the move tool, and it's got these little crosses that you can use in order to place this model. So then I can just kind of inference this to, I can just find a midpoint. And go ahead and set this in place. So now I've got kind of, I've got all my crown molding modeled in here. I've started bringing in these models from the 3D warehouse. I've drawn my window. So in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about materials and kind of where to go from here. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought. Again, is this helpful to you? Kind of going step by step like this? Is it a little too basic for you? I just love having that SketchUp conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. But once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.